The Asus AP201 is a simple but well-featured 33-liter mATX case. Let's review this and see why this one is a prime candidate for your next mATX build. Welcome to Machines More. So I review a lot of mini-itx cases, but I've seen some of your feedback. Many of you are interested in mATX cases as well, and perhaps that's for fitting a larger graphics card or just having more cooling or power supply flexibility. So we'll take a look at a few this week. For this video, let's start with Asus's Prime AP201. I'll show you the features of this case, some build details, and we'll wrap it up by discussing if this is the right case for you. Real quick before we begin, disclaimer, big thanks to Asus for providing the case and sub-accessories for our review today, but I am not paid by them for this review or any of the reviews on this channel. They don't have input into the testing methodology, neither do they have advanced knowledge of any of the review findings. Alright, so the AP201 is a 33-liter case in Asus's Prime brand. It comes in a mesh version or tempered glass version. The one I'm reviewing today is the mesh version. It's 460 millimeters long by 205 millimeters wide and 350 millimeters tall. Within this space, you can fit up to a 180 millimeter ATX power supply in one of three positions. The Dark Power Pro, like I have here from Be Quiet, it does fit, but you're going to be doing so at the expense of a lot of your space here underneath. The power supply will go in a cage that hooks up to the front panel. For a longer unit or for more cable space underneath, you can raise it. But if you are thinking of doing a 360 at the top, my recommendation would be to pick one that's less than 160 millimeters. The GX3, like I have installed here in the build, is 160 millimeters, and I have it installed in the number 3 position, and that does make a thicker unit like Lian Li's GA2 Trinity Performance pretty tight. Within this case, assuming you have a power supply here, you can fit up to a 338 millimeter card, and that number will still allow you to clear something like MSI's 4090 Supreme, which is 336 millimeters long. If you use a smaller power supply or you arrange it in a way that doesn't interfere with the card's position, theoretically, your card can go all the way to the front panel. For example, if you hang an SFX power supply high enough, the card can extend all the way to the front panel. The ATX power supply as it is here is about 93 millimeters of space, so figure add 93 millimeters to that if you can, and you're going to have a difficult time maxing this case out in that sense. You have 4 expansion slots available, and you can do either mini-itx or mATX boards in this case, and the standoffs are pre-installed. The case is a steel center frame with auxiliary steel panels like I have here. The two the top and the front panels are removable, toolless. They have square-shaped vent holes, and these will attach with toolless clips. 4 feet will elevate the case off the work surface approximately 25 millimeters, and at the back and the motherboard area, these are recessed at the case, so the back panel is going to be flush without any additional protrusions. So just whatever space you need to run your cables, that's what's going to stick out. At the top, you can put up to 2 140s, 3 120 millimeter fans, or 280 or 360 millimeter radiator. The 360 that I have here is about 60 millimeters thick. And with your power supply hanging in the lowest position, the top of the board's rear I/O heatsink, it barely clears the fan. And the power cable at the PSU end does contact the fittings that are exiting the radiator. So I would recommend sticking to units that are less than 58 millimeters just to make your life a little bit easier. But know that with a little bit of extra effort, you can in fact fit a unit like the GA2 Trinity Performance in here. If you want to air cool, there's very ample 170 millimeters of air cooler clearance, which should fit most large air coolers on the market today without any issues. At the bottom, you can do up to 2 120 millimeter fans to help feed your GPU's intake. And finally, there is a pre-installed 120 millimeter Asus fan at the back here. So the motherboard tray has plenty of cutouts where the cables can be managed to the board. And behind the motherboard panel, there are some cable management slots. I'm just going to flip this over. And the main one is this channel over here behind the cutouts And that's where most of your cables can be managed, and it comes with a few Velcro straps, which you can manage the bulk of your cables. For storage, you do have this 2.5-inch tray here specifically for an SSD. But the other ones, there are 3 other locations that can do either a 2.5-inch drive or 3.5-inch drive, and the specific location is denoted with an S or an H, respectively. Front panel I/O is at the top of the front panel. Features 2 USB 3.0 A ports, 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 C port. You got a separate headphone and microphone, 3.5mm jack, and power button with LED. For this build, I went with the Gigabyte B650M mATX board. That's also sporting Ryzen 9 7900X. And we've got the Gigabyte 6800XT Gaming OC card that I've been testing cases with. That's not the newest card, but it's definitely a good card to test with. I started out with Asus's Tough 360mm unit and 2 Tough fans at the bottom. The power supply is the Cooler Master GX3 850-watt ATX 3.0 unit. In general, I think the case is easy to build in. If desired, you can remove this trim panel here, and that'll allow you to access the cabling here and installing the PSU a little bit easier. I didn't actually have to remove it because there's still a good amount of room here. PSU hangs easily and just screw down at the front, and I would just recommend getting that in first, and that way you can lay out your cables, do some rough cable management, and then you can insert the motherboard. And then here I found the USB-A front header. It was a little bit annoying. Of course, that has to do more with the design of this board than anything else because it runs out the side 90 degrees. Even here, though, with the motherboard cutout, that cable fit just fine. Just a little bit tricky to get in. When your cables are sorted out, you can mount the radiator since that's going to sit on top of the board. So it's good to leave this until later to give yourself a little bit more room here. Go ahead and mount that CPU block. I found that in this case, as long as you have enough room above the power supply to clear radiator fittings, having the tubes exit the radiator from this side is an elegant way to do it. In particular, the Tough unit had a really nice way that the tubes could tuck away right behind the rad fans. With this one, they're a bit thicker, so it's harder to manage, so they'll have to overhang like that. But I did find the performance of the Tough 360mm unit a little bit wanting in terms of cooling the 7900X. For sure, it has enough radiator space, but I just felt that the cold plate performance was a bit wanting. Even after triple checking the cold plate and paste contact, it seemed like the heat transfer was a step behind even the highest performing 240s that I've run in mini-itx build. So what I did was swap in a higher performing Lianli GA2 Trinity Performance, which I've reviewed and you see installed here. Installing the card, it's a very easy step. You can just leave that until the end, and I think even if you have a large card, it'll slot in without any hiccups. Airflow setup I have here is top exhausting radiator. The rear fan is pre-mounted in exhaust, which I think is correct and makes sense. And the bottom intakes will feed some air to the card and help out with that cooling. At the bottom, you have a magnetic dust filter, which aligns with the airflow direction. It's convenient, pops on and off very easily. Your card's going to be intaking even if you don't have fans here, so that makes sense. No additional dust filters in this case. The makeup air for the radiator is going to mainly come in through the bottom and the front panels. So let's take a quick look at the thermals. I tested with both AIOs, and I didn't have a strong impression of the Tough unit, but I wanted to share the results anyway. With stock PBO, the Tough was running at 1670 RPM for the fans, a few decibels louder than the Lianli, which only needed 1430 RPM, and that was about 1 decibel over the noise floor. Now, it's not abnormal for the 7900X to hit the throttle temp pretty much right away. That's kind of how it's designed to work, but if you need to take a look at the boost clocks. Not only is the GA2 Trinity Performance not hitting the throttle temp, it's also running the first CCD at 5.27 gigahertz and the second CCD at 5.04 gigahertz. So the GA2 is quite a bit better. And if you are thinking of running something like the 7900X in general, the thermal transfer capability is key. So a good CPU block and cold plate is very, very important. I also locked the clocks here for the Lianli unit, 5.4 gigahertz at 1.25 volts. 91.3 degrees, which it's okay for this type of airflow setup. And to get better, you would have to flip the fans and run them as an intake, but that would be at the expense of worse GPU thermals in a combined scenario. So let's just take a quick look at that. For 1440p gaming, you won't have any issues getting 5.5 gigahertz with either 360mm unit. GPU temps here are absolutely fine. The GPU fans are spinning at 62% PWM here. So one thing that's helpful is to understand how much of a case penalty there is, and for that, running the same test with an open panel does result in a slightly better boost clock for the CPU only test. I think it's mostly negligible, and that suggests to me that in the CPU only scenario, the case is not really inhibiting the radiator. The ventilation is good. But in the gaming test, you'll see a little bit lower CPU temps here, and that's largely due to the mitigation of the GPU's exhaust passing through the rad. And when you have a panel here, more of that's getting forced into here. So thermals are absolutely fine with these panels. There's also not much of a noise impact one way or another. So let's just take a quick listen to the noise from the rad fans at 1500 RPM. Things I like about this case. In general, I think Asus did a very good job with the layout here. It's simple, it's straightforward, and the appearance is businesslike, and it blends well into its surroundings. It's got good capacity for components. The case in general works well, and despite only being 33 liters for an mATX case, there's still a decent amount of cable management room at the back, or I guess the right side, underneath the motherboard. There's good cooling choices you have, and fairly adequate storage compatibility. These side panels, although they feel a little bit average in quality, they're actually aligned pretty well with the toolless clips, and I never once had an issue with latching. And even though the case is not what I would consider to be well above average in terms of material quality, it still feels very sturdy and well finished. There's no rough edges or anything that would be dangerous to the user, or that anything that needed to be called out specifically. I do like that they stuck with a reasonable length here. So it's already a fairly long case, but some might say, oh, if you just gave it a little bit more, then you could fit a Strix card, right? That's Asus's own product, but then that really makes the case much larger. I like that they stuck to it because it is what it is, right? And I think that they have other products that can suit the builder if that's what they're building in, or the builder just needs to pick the suitable components for this case instead of just making this a do-it-all case. And I think that's a good idea. Potential improvement points are things to watch out for. So I'm not a huge fan of front IO that comes out the top of cases. You'll see a lot of ATX cases with front IO at that position. It may work for you depending on what your use case is, but do expect more cables having to droop down, a little bit more visual clutter. And same thing with the mounting location for the power plug at the back. It's at the top, and so that's not necessarily something terrible. It's just something to be aware of. With the bottom panel, and this is more of a fringe case here, there is space for a third 120mm fan, especially depending on how you configure your power supply, but there's actually no holes drilled for one. I'm not sure why that is. I would have liked to have the option even if I didn't use it, especially considering it would have just been to drill a few holes there. And it also would have been nice to have the option for a side radiator panel if you're running a 280, for example. With the ventilated panel, that's certainly not a problem airflow-wise, but there is no rad panel with this case. One other thing is on the right side of the panel of the case, you will be able to see into that cable management area slightly. So if you did have a bunch of cables that are managed there, which many of you will have plenty of cables there, so just be aware that they are visible with external light. So depending on how you display the case, don't make too much of a mess there, right? If that sort of thing would bother you. So pricing, the case comes in at $85 US right now, and I think that's pretty fair. The Cooler Master Cube 500 is a compact ATX case, similar volume. Actually, I think it's exactly the same, 33 liters. There's not as much radiator length there, but it's also a very versatile case with some neat features, and that one is about $100. Something smaller and cheaper like the roundabout $60 Sama IM01 comes in at around 22 liters. has similar GPU space, but it only takes a 240 on the side. So I think pricing for the AP201, it's mostly in line with what you get here. So to sum this one up, if you are looking for a straightforward compact case that will still let you run a 360 and modern graphics cards, and you don't mind being constrained to mini-itx or mATX motherboards, this one's not super flashy and doesn't try to do too much, but what it does, it's solid, dependable, and it's a good choice here from Asus. So I hope you enjoyed this review. Please support the channel by using the component links down below if you are shopping. Please make sure to give a like and stay subscribed. Big thanks for watching today.